Hello.
Hello.
Are we okay then just to get going, Karen?
Chair, Chair, yes, we are, Corey. And I think Sandra's just started a live stream. So, yes, it's 2 o'clock, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, welcome everybody to this afternoon's Angus IJB. I hope everybody's well. And I'll just begin as usual by acknowledging the efforts of all of the Angus HSCP staff and all of the partners continue to work within very challenging conditions, including all of the winter storms that we've been having, and of course the continued presence of COVID-19 within our cities. I'd actually like to welcome Eunice I'm going to get this right, McLennan, isn't that? McClellan, who has joined today as an observer, but Eunice will be formally starting her new role as head of Community Health and Care Services on the 1st of March. So we very much look forward to working with her. This is also the last meeting for David Thompson, and as part of Angus Council's Legal and Democratic Services team, legal services to the IJB for quite some time. And I'd like to formally thank David for all of his input and support on behalf of the IJB, and we all wish him all the very best for the future. So we move on now to David's got his hand up.
Sorry, Chair, I know we've got a busy agenda today, but I'd just like to thank you for your kind words, and I'd just like to thank all of the board members, Gail, Sandy, George and Gillian, and all their predecessors in office for what's been a great working relationship with the IJB. And most of all, I'd like to say thank you to Karen Mealy for her invaluable support over the years.
Great, thanks for that, David. And yeah, we wish you all the very best for the future. So moving on now to our agenda, have we got any apologies, Karen?
Apologies, Chair, from Barbara Tucker today.
That's great, thank you. And any declarations of interest? Do we have any declarations of interest? No, don't see any. Okay, we'll move on to item 3 on the agenda. 3A is the minutes of our previous meeting. Thank you very much to Karen for these. Do we have any comments, corrections? Are we happy to approve these? Take that as a... Yep, that's great, thank you. And we'll move on to 3B, which is the action log. Gail, I don't know if you want to take us through that.
Yes, Chair, I'll do that. As you can see, the first 3 items are all on target. I don't propose to discuss these, and then thereafter on page 15, they're also all on target or are indeed complete, so very encouraging picture there. If we could go back to the 14th of December 2020, minute notes, they're on page 16 of your bundle. The first one I'll draw your attention to is Mental Health and Wellbeing Strategy Update. The Chief Officer agreed to submit to the IJB on the 24th of February the plans. I would like to update you to the Mental Health and Wellbeing Strategy is now being operationalised with a full financial framework not yet available, but an update provided in the Mental Health report today. The revised timetable sets out the mental health report will come in full in April 22, Chair. The next one is the Angus IJB Strategic Financial Planning Update. Again, we identified previously about the COVID deadline. Again, I would like to reassure the committee a paper will come back in April 22. And the second part of that action was to refine the assumptions and responses regarding investment in our preventative approaches in our demand management, and that is overdue at the moment as well. It's on today's agenda. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, do we have any questions for Gail on that action log? No, everybody happy to note that then. Thank you. So we'll move on now to item 3C, which is the Audit Committee, and this is the minutes of the Audit Committee on the 8th of December, and these are for noting. Are we all happy to note those minutes? Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to item 4 in our agenda, which is appointments. Pretty straightforward. The information in this paper, we're being asked to note that Ivan Cornford has intimated his resignation as a non-voting member of the board in respect of commercial provider of social care, and that we are to welcome Nikki Worrell, independent sector lead for Angus at Scottish Care, as a non-voting member of the board. Are we happy with these recommendations? Yep. Okay, well, many thanks to Ivan for all of your input and support over the years, and we very much look forward to welcoming Nikki and to working with her in her new role. Okay, so we'll move on now to item 5. So you'll note in the agenda that we have a number of agenda notes for item 5, 6 and 7. So these are for members' information. So you will all have read these whenever you received your pack of papers. Are we all happy to note the updates that are provided within these agenda notes contained? Yep. Not sure what that noise is, but can you all still hear me? Yes, being nods. Gillian?
I suppose there, thank you, Chair. Just a bit of an update, just to confirm to the IGB that our engagement and comm sessions start next week around the mental health Living Life Well Angus implementation plan. So just to give some assurances that that's progressing as planned.
That's great, thanks very much. And we note that we're to see a full update report at an IGB meeting. So we've got those agenda notes for 5, 6 and 7. So if we move on now to item 8, which is the Angus Adult Protection Committee annual report. Do we have Ewan with us, Gail?
Unfortunately, Ewan, as chair of the Adult Protection Committee, is unable to attend today. I'd like to invite George Bowie to speak to the report. George is the vice chair of the Angus Adult Protection Committee.
That's great, thanks. Absolutely. Happy to hear from you, George, if you want to highlight any particular aspects of this paper.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, this is the annual report for 2020. Inevitably, with these things, it already feels slightly out of date as we've moved forward with a lot of the actions and new actions, indeed, in the world has changed a wee bit in the almost a year elapsed. What we're asking of members is to scrutinise and comment on the content and to consider key trends and areas for development. So it's a statutory duty to complete a biannual report, but we also do an annual one as well. The IGB is responsible under the integration scheme for the governance of adult support and protection delivery. There's a risk register for the Angus Adult Protection Committee, but there are no exceptions recorded in this report. So there's nothing that we consider to be of undue risk. I think I'll highlight some of the points. I think the big stories are the increased number of ICRs and case reviews. The review of the early screening group, further work needed to conclude that, and that piece of work, like many other things, has been delayed by COVID. Our emphasis on self-evaluation and continuous improvement. We have a pretty rigorous approach to that, for example, through case reviews, ICRs and SCRs, and our self-assessment for inspection from the care inspector, which we're thinking will probably happen after the summer, but we don't have a definite date yet. And the large in adult protection activity and referrals, and some of those actually doubled during the period concerned. I would also add a big change in the number of referrals coming through for the mental health service and ADAR's, a substance misuse service. We've had an increase in referrals from family members and from the public. That's all to the good. We issued our first, or obtained our first adult protection order during this period since 2015. and we have recently obtained a second one, which is in fact a removal order. The tariff for using the emergency measures is quite high, so they are used rarely, but we have been using them a little bit more. We've had an increase in the number of invitations to case conferences for independent advocates. We've had a significant increase in referrals regarding people with mental health difficulties. And just to mention a few developments, we're working on a new data set. We're trying hard to find ways of ensuring that our work is informed by the service user voice, people with lived experience of being in the adult protection system. The forthcoming inspection I've mentioned, we're doing a lot of preparation for that, and very live at the moment is implementing the findings of SCRs, ICRs and the Adult Protection Improvement Plan. So those are the main issues, Chair. I'm quite happy to take some questions.
Okay, thanks very much for that, George. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, George, for covering for you and on this. I think the contents of this report really demonstrate just how important an area of work this is for us. I'm, like you, hugely concerned around the increase in referrals and demand. And I was wondering, do we have enough staff capacity to cover all of these case conferences and the increase in case conferences? And given inactivity, might it be possible for the IGB to get a 6-month update on the back of this report? I know that's a big ask, but I just think the levels are so worrying. I would rather that the IGB was cited on that without waiting for another year. I just think it's such an important area. That would be my question, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Dealing with the last of those things first, yeah, I'd be quite happy to take a 6-monthly report. It wouldn't be a report from the Adult Protection Committee, probably, but I would include Adult Protection Committee business in that, if that sounds okay. In demand, yeah, I think it has stretched the care management teams, but using new monies from the Scottish Government winter planning, which will, I think, be mentioned in Sandy's report, we have been increasing the capacity within the care management teams. So we are recognising that amongst many other things, including with adults with incapacity work, has increased. So we are increasing the size of the team, and we also now have a second adult protection officer working alongside Mark Hodgkinson. So we've recognised the increase in demand and tried to grow to meet that. We're also having a look at our projections in terms of demand for adult protection training for staff as well. So we are kind of growing to match the demand wherever we can.
Okay, thanks for that, Andrew. Andrew Jack.
Thank you. Wondering about the increased demand in case referrals. Just wondering what the underlying reason, do you have a feel for that? Is this increased activity because of better pathways and reporting, or is there an underlying trend of growth in incidents in adult protection? And if so, is there an early prevention aspect to this that we could look at as well?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I mean, we don't have an absolutely agreed formula for why the increase has occurred. I think it's a combination of factors, but I could mention what I think some of those are. You're right, I think better reporting and referral routes. I think some of the major stakeholders in adult protection work have improved their adult protection work and have a much greater level of awareness. So I think NHS, for example, as an organisation, has invested heavily in its approach to adult protection work, and I think that's leading to more referrals coming through professional channels. We've done a lot of work on public awareness, and more of that coming up just shortly with the Adult Protection National Day. So I think it's a combination of those things. I think there have been tensions in certain services between adults with incapacity work and adult protection work, and there is a bit of an overlap, and sometimes I think the staff were not quite clear about which route to follow, and that's a legitimate question in individual cases. But I think there's been much more of a drive to go down the adult protection route. So I think a couple of services in particular have increased their referrals, and that's very marked. I think there's a COVID factor, Andrew. I'm not sure what it is, but I think there is some kind of COVID factor. And I think it's probably around general mental health and well-being that people are just not feeling great, and that increase in mental health in its broadest definition is a factor in this mix as well. So I don't have a very precise answer about that, but I think that's what the main contributing elements are.
Yeah. But in general, the increased activity is to be welcomed rather than
yes.
worried about.
Well, you know, is high level of numbers of referral a good thing or a bad thing? It's something that we wrestle with. It's a bad thing in the sense that it shows something in society that's not good or troubling or worrying. But on the other hand, it gives us an opportunity to respond to those situations. We would rather know about it and be able to address it.
Gail, will I bring you in just now?
Yes, Chair, thank you. I actually, Andrew, I do think it's a good thing that we've escalated this. I'm actually really encouraged by this report. I've shared that with you in West and with George. I think they're doing a sterling amount of work there, and I do believe some of this is due to COVID and the COVID factor. But like you, Andrew, I think we've got very clear pathways around what we do. So I would like to think that because we've done that, we are seeing an increase in number. I'm very encouraged by the report and the work that they're doing. And in the report, I can't remember which page number, but we've highlighted about protecting people and the risk register. And I want to reassure the committee that any risks that cannot be mitigated against by the Adult Protection Committee, they are escalated to the Angus Chief Officers Group. So that's by way of reassurance for everybody. And also, as George mentioned there, NHS Tayside have also invested heavily into adult protection and their responsibilities under this. They've got a strategic lead for adult protection, 3 adult protection advisors, a MAPA health liaison officer, a violence against women advisor, a care home advisor supporting adult protection, and a Band 4 business support assistant. So I believe it is because of our investment and our work there, Andrew.
That's great. Thanks, Gail. That was helpful, that update. Sarah.
Thank you very much, Chair. And it isn't really a question, it was just a comment. I understand that it's Adult Support and Protection Awareness Raising Week this week, and I just wondered if you wouldn't mind sharing with members any planned awareness raising that you were doing across the Angus communities. Thank you.
Yeah, I can comment on that, Sarah. There are a range of public engagement activities going on, newsletters, invitations to meetings where Ewan and I are available for questions. We did that last year. It was quite successful. Sally Wilson, our comms lead, is doing a bit of work on that as well. So we're getting messages out there and inviting questions and responses. As I say, it was quite popular last year. So we're hoping that'll strike a chord again.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Sarah. That was useful, that prompt. Catherine.
Thank you. I'll not repeat some of the questions and comments that others have already covered. But George, I wondered whether or not, with your Vice Chair of the Adult Protection Committee hat on, you are confident that the whole of the Health and Social Care Partnerships engagement in adult protection is sufficiently well resourced to meet the improvements. So not just the attendance at case conferences and the kind of direct staffing kind of impact that has, particularly in the social work side of things. But I'm thinking about the kind of whole system, and or whether or not there's an ask of the IJB around that. And the other thing was just that it's really helpful to see the issue around transitions specifically highlighted in this report. I know that's an issue that's particularly close to your own heart, and I know it's an issue that we are certainly seeing a growth in complexity around. So transitions for complex young people transitioning into adulthood across a range of different services, but in particular that kind of interface between child protection, public protection and adult protection. And just really wanted to draw attention of members to the kind of interwoven aspects of that. It's not one thing one day and something else the next, and it does require quite a lot of very careful consideration for every single case, and it does require good cooperation across all services. So it's just to say that it's helpful to have that highlighted, and that there is improvement work around that complex area being undertaken at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Emma Fletcher.
Thank you.
Is there an answer to the question around the kind of engagement and resourcing issue? Because I do think it's quite important that the committee gets that assurance. Sorry, the board.
Yeah, I can comment on that. Now, it would be unwise of me to say I could swear that across every aspect of the Health and Social Care Partnership, which is a massive organisation, every bit of that was tuned into adult protection needs and concerns. I think there's always a bit of work to do on that, because people change, the structures and processes change. So I think that is a continuous job for the Protection Committee to make sure that all areas are tuned in and alert and contributing to operational delivery and to strategic improvement. But I think we're well placed to do that. My view, and you might say, well, you would say that, you're the Vice Chair, but I do think the Adult Protection Committee is working very effectively, both in its job of pulling all the agencies together to work cooperatively and in providing scrutiny to make sure that that's effective. I think if we look at some of the improvement actions that are in the action plans for the SCR and the ICRs, some of those are quite complicated. They're multi-agency, and I think as we get into them a bit more, we'll untangle processes that are pretty complicated and that we need to work on. So I think that's a good thing. It's quite difficult work, but I think that will open up some of that, and it'll help us to get assurance that the kind of really complex areas are functioning well. Pathways, for example, are always challenging. So I couldn't, it would be unwise of me probably to give 100% blanket assurance on that, Catherine, but I think we're certainly travelling in the right direction. The rigour is there. I'll comment on the transitions issue as well. So I chair the transitions group at the moment, although there's the plan in place for Eunice to take over that lead for me in due course. And the transitions group has been reporting into the Adult Protection Committee as well. There's a number of vulnerable client groups within the transitions group, but in particular there is a group of very vulnerable young people, often ex-care leavers, people with a whole range of needs and issues, very often linked to childhood trauma. We're focusing in a lot on the needs of that group and trying to resource it properly and work out our systems for working across services on that. One of the things we introduced a couple of years ago was the Complex and Coexisting Conditions Panel. I chair that at the moment, but that is meant to be rotated. Hasn't been yet, but that does consider cases where there is a kind of unusual layer of complexity, or the cases don't fit neatly into service boundaries, or where they've become a bit stuck and there are perhaps tensions between the different professional bodies. And the idea of that group is to resolve those issues and ensure that vulnerable people, and many of them are young people, are receiving good multi-professional inputs. So I think that group is working quite well. It's probably slightly underused just now, so we maybe need to have another drive to get work highlighted for it in the post-COVID world. It's probably just slightly fallen out of people's vision. So we need to maybe resume that a bit.
Okay, thanks very much for that, George. Emma?
Thank you. I'd just like to pick up further on Andrew Drack's point, because I think in addition to the pathways, I think it is very notable that on page 45, there's a significant contribution from substance use and mental health, the causes of which are multifactorial but growing in prevalence across Tayside and Scotland, disproportionately impacting people living in areas of greatest deprivation and causing significant premature morbidity and mortality. Absolutely priorities for public health and should be a key focus of preventative work, which I think was a key point that Andrew also flagged. So just to echo that and really emphasise the challenges that we face at the moment in relation to mental health and wellbeing, which we will know, but also that synergistic impact with substance use, unfortunately. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much for that, Emma. Councillor Speed?
Yeah, thanks, Emma Jane. Yeah, just kind of picking up and expanding on kind of the impact of COVID-19. And, you know, I think George, you said, you know, just not quite able to kind of put your finger on just exactly what that is and why. I'm just wondering as well whether there's any kind of relation in terms of kind of unmet care needs where people haven't perhaps got their full level of support that they require, and whether that is then kind of coming through with, you know, with these cases that increase and people's vulnerabilities.
Yeah, we're not picking up a pattern of that, Lois, but I would be surprised if the kind of level of isolation perhaps that some carers have experienced, if that didn't contribute to the picture generally. I don't think we've yet got enough distance on COVID. I for example, I'm still chairing the weekly care home operational group and the care at home group, and we're still dealing with live Omicron issues and have care homes closed because of outbreaks and so on. So I don't, it's probably just a bit too early to know whether there's kind of statistical relevance from that, but my hunch would be that yes, that is an issue.
Yeah. And how are kind of teams managing to kind of monitor and measure perhaps service users who don't have the kind of assessed level of support needs in place? Are they managing to then just obviously try and safeguard to ensure that it doesn't then result in
Yeah, through care management, we've also introduced a group called the POG, which is the Priority Operations Group, which is picking up on the highest risk and need cases and asking for those to be prioritised with the providers of care at home. So yeah, we're very aware of that issue and we are on top of that.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, MJ.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any further questions? No. So just a point as discussed at the start from Councillor Bell in terms of an update report or updated information in 6 months. If we're mindful of that action point, are we happy with the remaining recommendations at the top of the paper? Yep. Okay, that's great. Lois, did you want to come in again, or is that a legacy hand? She looks like she's frozen now, actually.
I'll take that down, sorry. So
okay.
My screen I do keep freezing.
Okay. Okay, so we're moving on to item 9 now. We've now got our 3 reports focused on finance. Thanks very much to Sandy for these reports. So the first is the Finance Report 2021-22, and I'll hand over to Sandy.
Thank you, Chair, and hi everybody. So yeah, you're right, Chair. First of 3 reports. This is the routine or regular finance report. It captures information largely up to the end of January and does forecast to the end of the year. Although we are increasingly clearly nearer at the end, still a lot of things evolving in our financial reporting. Some of that is us reflecting adjustments to do with funding and to do with funding coming from the Scottish Government and COVID issues. But you know, we are getting near to the year end, and hopefully hopefully the projections will gradually settle down. I want to pick out 2 or 3 points from the report, just to highlight them and maybe to tie back to 1 or 2 of the recommendations. Section 3.1 of the report just kind of outlines where we are with some issues regarding our local hospital and community health services, but we've taken the opportunity of putting a wee update in there about psychiatry of old age, particularly the work associated with the Angus Care Model review of psychiatry of old age, and we're just highlighting that we still have some issues regarding the clarity about the future use of the former Mulberry unit at Stracathro, which we haven't quite been able to bottom out. Highlight that there because it appears as a recommendation that we asked the chair of the IGB to write to NHS Tayside, again seeking clarity about where we are with that. So that's just worth noting that. Section 3.2 of the report is not an area I would particularly highlight, but just worth noting here. This covers services including out-of-hours services, and what we are able to see here that we are now able to link some of the new Scottish Government funding coming in, which I refer to later on in the report, to resolving some of the issues that have emerged and the models of care that have emerged out of COVID. So that is a helpful thing. I say I wouldn't normally mention it, but I think it's worth just noting that as an example. Further on in the report, section 3.6, inpatient mental health services. I note in there's a paragraph about us having ongoing dialogue with NHS Tayside about the future financial management of those services. And it says towards the end of that paragraph, we are still trying to bottom this out, and we'll come back to the IJB with a position about that. Now, when I wrote that paragraph, that was, I wrote it probably 3 or 4 weeks ago in a draft form, went out the 23rd of February, and I'm kind of conscious as I was rereading the papers that we actually need to reach a position regarding 21-22 as well as the long-term position. The Chair, regarding that paragraph, if it was okay, I would like to add another recommendation in, and that would be to devolve a remit to the Chief Officer, the Chief Finance Officer, the Chair and the Vice Chair, authority from the Board to reach agreement regarding 21-22 only with NHS Tayside on this matter, because otherwise, if we leave it to the next IGB meeting, we'll have got too close to the end of the year. So if we could add that recommendation in regarding this year only, that would be helpful. Just to highlight a couple of other areas, just to kind of bring things together, because they do tie in with other reports we're talking about. In section 3.9, we highlight where we are with adult services, and we do refer to things like the unmet need and 1 or 2 vacancy issues that we have. These are things that we've spoken about before in the IGB, so it is noted there. And then further on in the report at 3.2, we again refer to the COVID issues. Again, it ties in with financial planning, but we do now have funding kind of supporting COVID quite clearly for this year and for next year, so that is helpful. Another area I think it's important I highlight, because it ties back to previous reports the IGB have received, is that section 3.15. I'll just let you all get there. On my papers, it's page 76, 3.15. It's a group of paragraphs described as winter planning funding. This was funding we were notified about at the end of 2021. And in October 2021, the IGB agreed to devolve responsibility to the Chief Officer, as described in that first paragraph, to develop plans. We've now done that through a kind of a collaborative working group in the partnership. And we've set out in the subsequent paragraphs how we are proposing largely to work with these funding streams. They cover a number of different things. 3.15.1 highlights, for example, the helpful increase in the hourly rates for social care staffing. So that is a very helpful thing. Rates will further go up in April. And then there's another group of areas, particularly 3.15.3, expanding care at home. Now, George referred to this earlier on when he was talking about areas that we're putting additional resource into. And I think it's worth noting that we have always tried to support the volume growth in care at home, and that's been a real strategic feature, and it will continue to be a strategic feature of all our plans for the forthcoming for all the forthcoming years. But what we've probably not properly done, I think we were gradually realising this or recognising this in the IGB, is while we maybe have supported the direct care at home, we haven't supported necessarily fully the things around care at home. And you can see a list in that table there that shows the things, like what George referred to earlier on, that we're now trying to make sure we properly support everything around the direct care at home with all the other things that need to be there to augment that care to make it a fulsome care that we would all expect. And this funding stream has absolutely allowed us to do that. We were recognising it and realising we hadn't maybe done that as fully as we could have, but this allows us to do that much more comprehensively and on a surer footing. So that is definitely a good thing. And my final comment, just for me to make, is that Appendix 2, occasionally referred to, that is the Reserves Appendix. Just to kind of flag up to everybody, our reserves at the end of this year will definitely go up because of the way Scottish Government are managing funding through the system. It is not a unique thing for Angus IJB. This will happen across all IJBs in Scotland. There will be kind of a bit more government guidance about the kind of management of reserves. So just kind of flagging that up as a kind of almost a heads up, but we'll see that more fully when we do a report to the next IJB. So Chair, I'll stop there, but I'm obviously happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Sandy. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, and thank you, Sandy. I wanted to articulate my frustration around the former Mulberry unit at Stracathro, and that this issue is still rumbling on after a good number of years now. I support the issuing of a letter. However, linking to the 3.6 on page 72, I would just like a bit of clarity on what it is that we would be regarding as a positive outcome on the back of that letter. If you can give us anything on that, please, that would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Bell. The two issues, ironically, are actually unrelated largely now, certainly in my head. So the paragraph where I've written that initial suggestion about writing a letter, that is really about, the facility is not currently in use, but we have psychiatry of all age services on the site, and we're looking at options for their redesign. And to do that, they kind of need to have a clarity about what options are available. And they're just needing clarity about, what is the status of that former mental health facility. So that's really, we're asking that question because we're looking for a way forward for perhaps another service in terms of utilisation and best utilisation of the facility. Separately, the issue about...
Could I come back there? So,
of course, yeah.
What's the barrier to that?
Okay, so there have been issues, I think, within the overall management of mental health services about getting complete clarity about the estate, the facilities or the properties that the mental health general adult psychiatry inpatient services would wish to use. And of course, they historically occupied that facility at Stracathro. And while they've been off it for a number of years, they've never said formally, we won't reuse that facility. And because that's never formally been said, or publicly said, or formally said, it kind of means there's not quite an open door for us to actively recycle it or redeploy it as best we might want to. It just even as an option for consideration. So really, we're looking for clarifying that position from the perspective of inpatient mental health services to allow us to move on and see, is that facility now part of options we can consider for other use? So that's what I think. Hopefully, Councillor Bell, that kind of makes sense. But hopefully that does make sense.
Okay, thanks for that, Sandy. Chris.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Just to speak, Sandy, just a point on 3.15.3 about expanding care at home. You're probably all more than aware of the recruitment and retention issues that exist across the social care workforce, both in the private sector and within the local authority. Units of Scotland recently conducted a survey among social care staff, with 97% of those who responded saying that their workplace was currently experiencing a shortage of staff, and that 35% of respondents were actively considering leaving or trying to leave the sector in the coming months to go and work elsewhere with not necessarily more attractive jobs, but better paid jobs. So noting the allocation of £240,000 for enablement and response and a significant amount of money to provide an additional 1,400 home care hours, what is the situation with recruiting staff to actually deliver those hours against the backdrop of the crisis that we know currently exists in staffing social care? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And George might come in a second. I hope, anyway. You're right, Chris. What we have seen is we have experienced those changes in our provision. I think somewhere else in this report it does mention that we have had periods of slightly unmet levels of need in our home care provision. I think some of that is slightly turning around, but we certainly have experienced some shortcomings in that. I know we work quite collaboratively, or as collaboratively as we can, with the providers that provide those services to link up with them to try and encourage recruitment. And some of this funding, although it's perhaps not, I've maybe over summarised it here, some of that funding is being used to help providers with some of their recruitment issues. And we know that Pauline Reid, who works in our works on our relationships with providers, is working hard at that. George, would you want to come in and comment on that any further?
Yeah, I could do, Sandy. You're right. There is a feeling of a corner being turned. I don't want to jinx it by saying that prematurely, but I think that is the case. We monitor it each week through the Care at Home operational group. Big slot in that is about the supports we're providing to the independent sector. So looking at the notes from last Thursday, one of the providers, I probably shouldn't name them because it's confidential, had 7 new starts and was able to take on 21 new service users. So there is a bit of movement in that, Chris, and I think that's directly down to the support we are giving to the independent sector with recruitment. You're right, we're adding new capacity into enablement service. 10 new workers are going into that. I'm pretty optimistic we'll recruit them. The only problem is we operate in a fairly small pond and everybody's fishing in the same pond, so the chances are we'll remove those from those people will be recruited from the independent sector. There is a risk that we just start moving people around within the sector. We've actually got to get more recruits across the board, and that's one of the things we're doing. We're giving incentive payments to providers for people that are still there after, I think it's 8 months, to try and get people to come into the care as a career and stick in it as well. So I don't know if that answers your question, Chris.
It provides some substance, George. I mean, I'm acutely aware of the retention issues and recruitment issues, indeed, that exist. And I don't think it's going to be a short fix. It's going to be, I think, a whole-scale review of how attractive a career in social care is in the private sector, or indeed within the local authority, and making that a more viable and viable from a financial and a career point of view, particularly for young people entering the sector. I think it's a big challenge ahead of us, and a step that there might be a feeling here in Angus that we're perhaps turning a corner, but it's a big issue. And as hours increase and longevity and all the issues that we know about, that pressure to recruit staff and make it an attractive job to come into, and one that people will stay at and perhaps stay with the same employer, rather than what we do experience at the moment of people hopping around between jobs. Maybe there might be a few pence an hour more between different providers. So a long road to go.
I agree, Chris. That group that I referred to started off as a COVID group, but it's become much more of a kind of general operational group from Care at Home. And I think the recruitment and retention support, you're right, is a long-term issue, not a short-term fix.
Okay, Elaine.
Just a question. The purpose of putting the increased funding into the IJB reserves, do we then get an ability to make some strategic planning for what we do with those reserves? Can we then use those perhaps for investment, or do we have any steer from Scottish Government of what we can do, or can we think imaginatively and strategically for what great opportunity that brings us?
Well, Elaine, absolutely we can, yes. But so there are some caveats to some of this. Some of the reserves that come out from the government are clearly labelled literally only to support the immediate time-limited consequences of COVID. And unfortunately, they are probably our bigger reserves. They certainly will be by the end of the year. So there are some caveats. There are also other funding streams where we will have a bit more flexibility. We already have a strategic planning reserve, which has been looked at, and I can't remember if you've attended, Elaine, but that has been looked at through our strategic planning group. And we have made some strategic investments through that have been helpful and helped us get from, say, A to B. And we continue to have that reserve. It's quoted as £2 million in this report, but some of that might already be allocated. So it might be unfair of me to say that that's all available and in play. There will also perhaps be other reserves that we can mobilise for specific actions. So I think if there were things that we were looking to do, we would pick them up through the strategic planning group. And what we could perhaps do is, if you've got specific ideas, we can bring them into the next, into a future strategic planning group environment. I think that's my wife giving me our latest family COVID update. I'll put that away. So we could bring them into the strategic planning group and work out, if there's good ideas we could explore on that front. So I can maybe drop you a note, Elaine, about scale of resources we maybe have in play, and if there's a way we can bring something into the strategic planning group, that would be absolutely fine. But in terms of generally imaginative things that help us to get from A to B along that strategic direction, the answer I'd like to think was yes, but there's one or two caveats on the overall reserves.
Really helpful, and yes, I'd like to.
Fantastic. Okay.
Okay, and Councillor Miles.
Thank you, Emma Jane. A couple of questions and a comment. I'll start with a comment first. I fully support the desire to get clarity on the Mulberry unit and Scathro, because it's frustrated me no end that we have a facility there we're not able to utilise. And I don't know how long now it's been sitting, but far longer than it need be. And we can't utilise what was an excellent facility. So the sooner we get some clarity on that and get moving forward on that one. A couple of questions, Sandy. In the services hosted elsewhere and service we host for other IJBs, what's the procedure for getting remuneration from that? Does other health boards pay us for service we host for them, and we do likewise? Because there's bound to be some sort of transfer of funds, and do we have any control if let's say they overspend more than they should, or we just have to accept these overspends? And I'll throw in the second question because it's related to what you've just been replying to Elaine on reserves. Very pleased to see an increase in general reserves. It's heartening to know we have reserves there uncommitted to deal with problems, but slight concern they may get subsumed, especially if it's COVID related money. And I know that the health board are allowed to keep reserves, and I wouldn't want any of our reserves to disappear. They're probably just underspends or future spends that we haven't used yet. So if you can just give clarity on that one. Thanks, Andy.
Okay, yep, thanks, Councillor Miles. So two different issues. I'll pick up on the reserves thing just to follow that one through. The reserves, theoretically, are under our control. And I say theoretically because they're also subject to the fact that the Scottish Government they're often Scottish Government funding. The Government have said, do this with something, and we're like, well, we haven't quite got that done, or, you gave us the money in February, we could never spend it by the end of March. But the Scottish Government will have some kind of direction about that. So the way we deploy them in future years will also continue to be subject to some kind of Scottish Government direction. The reserves that we would describe as kind of Scottish Government related earmarks, we are kind of beholden to the guidance we continue to get from the Scottish Government. The local reserves are within our own control, and you'll recall, and the board will probably recall, we've done various things with the reserves in the past. So that will always be in our own domain to make those decisions. So anything about those would come back to the IJB. So hopefully the worries you have are maybe restricted to future Scottish Government, your thoughts that they may have. You've definitely asked about the hosted services, either services that we host on behalf of others or others host on behalf of us. This is really just Dundee and Perth IJBs. We essentially run those services on behalf of all three IJBs, and Angus, and equally Dundee and Perth run things on behalf of on our collective's behalfs. And we all pick up a fair share of the costs. We have a fair share of the budget, and we have a fair share of the overspend. So we are all kind of intertwined there, and we are reliant on other people to do their best job, like they are reliant on us to do ours. So we do have some management conversations about these, but generally we rely on others to kind of manage these services as best they can on our behalf. And if there was a strategic decision about some of them, we'd see a strategic position come back regarding those services. So we are reliant on others managing these on our behalf, like they are reliant on us, and there's that kind of interrelationship. Hopefully that again clarifies that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just to preempt the next paper, I should have declared on that, but I couldn't get my technology to work at the time. But obviously I'm involved with Angus Council's budget setting, so I'm declaring on the next paper, but I'll take part. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Elaine.
It was just to speak there about the we're very good at investing in new properties, but we're very, very bad at disinvesting or alternatively using ones that we're no longer using for the prime purpose. And I think it's a conversation that I've been having with several people across the board. And I wonder if it's an area where some clinical input may help, because I'm just reflecting back your conversation there that we've never had that formal announcement about not using our properties for such as the Mulberry unit. And with the uncertainty, often we can see properties fall into disrepair, and it's enormously frustrating when we have other people that would use them. So I'm actively leading a repurposing of a property in P&K from the Health and Social Care Partnership, and it seems incredibly convoluted to have to go around. And I think as a board, there probably is some role for the board to have an overarching connection, and also perhaps some clinical clarity about what isn't likely to happen with some of our properties. So I think there's a huge benefit here, not only for people being able to use the buildings that we have, but also a cost saving for areas that we're not ever going to use in the same purpose again. We have a lot of property, but we don't, I think, have that stewardship. So I'm actively discussing.
Okay, thanks for that, Elaine. And Alison?
Yes, I would just like to support Elaine with that, and particularly around primary care premises and a conversation around how we do long-term conditions, outpatients and day treatments in particular. So there's been a discussion around Angus around doing a bit of discovery work, looking at who may be interested in providing day treatments, particularly as medicine's moved on over the last 20 years, and a lot of our treatments are prescribed in historical specialty models. However, things change, and the day treatments that are required to be provided now are different, and so there's lots of opportunities and also lots of call on that space. And if we're wanting integrated teams with district nursing and social work, that's super. But also we may wish to have integrated teams around long-term condition management, our mental health hubs, and moving things into community. So we need to have a strategic overview of this, and I guess for me, whether we have that might be more appropriate to come to the strategic planning group with updates to the IJB, but absolutely support a IJB sort of strategic overview of premises as Elaine's proposing, in conjunction with the council and some of the things they may wish co-located, and social prescribing, but also thinking around our acute services hospital interfaces as well.
Okay. Thanks very much for that. I think that's been really helpful, especially with regarding that final recommendation in terms of seeking clarity about the Mulberry unit in particular. I think we'll be following that up in terms of that clinical engagement. Do we have any further questions for Sandy? I see one hand up. Peter.
Yeah, I don't want to labour the point, but I've really welcomed that last two contributions there. I have to stop calling myself a new member of the board. It's approaching a year, but because of COVID, we just haven't been able to get out and see these facilities and speak to the staff about the frustrations with such. So I'd really welcome a wider conversation on that particular topic.
Great, thanks very much, Peter. If we don't have any more questions, and I think that was a very helpful set of questions we've had, so thank you very much, everybody. Just moving to the recommendation, there are 5 recommendations here, mindful that Sandy had highlighted a further recommendation in terms of reaching agreement on the position regarding inpatient mental health services. Can you clarify that, Sandy? Yep.
Yes, Chair. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
What we were saying is we would like the board to just pass responsibility or devolve authority to myself and Gail, yourself, Chair, and the Vice Chair, if there's a need to reach an agreement with NHS Tayside about 2021-22 only regarding financial arrangements for mental health. So not a long-term thing, purely an in-year, and it was only because we're so close to the wire in terms of an impending year end now.
Okay, thanks for that. And so are we all happy with those recommendations? Yep. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. So we'll move on to the second of our financial papers, which is item 10, the budget settlements with Angus Council and NHS Tayside. And I'll hand over to Sandy again for this.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I don't think this shouldn't take quite as long because there's not quite as much in this report. So this is a regular report, but rather than coming to the meeting every single meeting, this comes once a year, and it's where we set out proposals regarding our budget settlements with our two partners, Angus Council and NHS Tayside, bearing in mind that Scottish Government funding for the IGB tends to come through one or other. The case for the last 2 or 3 years, increasingly and almost kind of universally, is that these budget settlements include an enormous element of directed decisions by the Scottish Government. A number of years ago, there was a lot of local flexibility, but it's much more prescribed by the Scottish Government. And to some extent, that makes these reports easier to document, and they are kind of setting out almost kind of what the government are saying has to be passed through to us. So that's what this paper does. The first big chunk of narrative describes the in section 3 describes the proposed budget settlement with Angus Council. It references funding streams come in, some of which we've referred to in the last paper. You should recognise some of those, some of which are new and haven't been fully expanded on yet. That paper, part of the paper, is expressed in pounds. Then we move on to the next chunk of the paper, which is our relationship or our settlement with NHS Tayside. That relationship is expressed in percentage uplifts because that's the way the government tend to deal with it, and we've got a kind of a description there. We have got a slight caveat against that for the part with NHS Tayside. We're very keen to get to the bottom of our long-standing unresolved issues regarding the funding of some complex care or shared care arrangements. We've had conversations with the Director of Finance of NHS Tayside and Angus Council about that, but a number of years into the existence of the partnership, it really is time that we resolve that. So hopefully we can do that as part of this year's budget settlement. But otherwise, the Chief Officer and myself are happy to recommend these budget settlements to the board with that caveat that I've just set out and that is included in the recommendations.
Okay, thanks for that, Sandy. Do we have any questions? Nope. Okay, so in terms of the recommendation, we're asked to note the views of the Chief Officer and the Chief Finance Officer that we should accept the budget offer from Angus Council and from NHS Tayside, subject to the resolution of the budget issues regarding complex care resources. Are we happy with those recommendations? Yep. Okay, thank you very much. And Sandy, you again. So we've got the IJB strategic financial plan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. This group of reports. So again, this is a regular but a once-a-year report for the IJB. It is a draft financial plan. We plan to bring a final financial plan back to our April meeting, and it's a 3-year financial plan. We're obviously doing this in a period of still a bit of uncertainty and certainly evolving situations, a challenging background that the IGB members will all be familiar with. This report is largely written to kind of not include new information. It should consolidate things that people are already aware, members are already aware of. And you almost, if you're going through parts of it, you go, yeah, I know that, I've seen that before, and you should be able to recognise things. It's also done so it is consistent with our overall strategic plan, and it's written in a manner that's similar to previous years. So anybody who's been party to these papers in previous years hopefully would recognise the format and therefore find it relatively accessible, I hope. Again, I'm just going to pick up, if it's okay, Chair, a few bullet points to maybe emphasise points or just to kind of, just highlight particular issues. First part I would just highlight with section 4.1. I'll just let people get there 4.1 is on page, I think page 90 of my papers anyway. That's a section about budget budget settlements. And I just want to kind of highlight that one because that ties back to the paper we've just seen. There's a little bit of repetition between the two of them, but that repetition is included there for completeness. So, that's an example of us taking information and sourcing it from another place. A bit further on in the report, I'm looking here at section 5.2, which I think is on page 92. 5.2, again, just as an example of the content, it describes inflationary pressures that we're experiencing. I think that's a slightly more evolving situation than perhaps been for the last few years. But again, as just for all your general awareness of the news, you will all know that, and there's probably a higher element of risk associated with some of our inflation assumptions at the moment. So that's just an area that kind of ties back with things that you'll all be familiar with from the news and just your general awareness of the situations that are existing in the country. 5.3 on the next page, demographic pressures. Again ties in with things that we've spoken about before. We know we have a long-term strategic need to continue to support people being looked after at home. This does get built into this report. We've got funding available from the new funding streams in the first year, and we build it in ourselves in the second and third year. And I highlight that because ultimately, that is one of the pressures that puts a burden in the financial plan, and it's one of the things that strategically we need to be able to solve by doing other things in our overall financial planning and overall strategic planning. So we've got that still built in there, and it's still a key part of our overall planning. Moving a bit further down, 5.7, COVID remobilisation plans, just sets out where we are. There are one or two unresolved recurring pressures, but there's a lot of funding in place for 22-23, so that is helpful. And 5.8, just highlight that section because it ties back to things that we've spoken about before and links in with things we'll speak about in the future. We have a strategic aim to develop our prevention agenda. We know that is not specifically addressed in our strategic financial plan. We've heard it mentioned already today about something that we aspire to deal with. And obviously, if we were able to kind of create the circumstances when we would be able to do that, that would fall into a future iteration of this plan. Section 6 generally is an important section. It covers our planned interventions, the things that help us deliver our overall financial plan. It's important to bear in mind that the things in this plan are assumed to happen, and there is an assumption that they will all be delivered at some point. We have changed the timelines of some of these. There's not much new content in there. We're really kind of looking for the IJB to kind of deal with things that we have already on the go and wrap these things up. A lot of them have been around a long time because of COVID. I think there's a period of consolidation focusing on delivering these before we move on to other ideas that will help us solve things in the next couple of years. But we really have an imperative to solve all the things we've kind of got on the table to allow us to move on. Section 7.2, I think, is a section about prescribing, and within that it's worth noting we continue to work with our local and regional groups, but there are also issues associated with new drugs that are coming online, and that's another risk that the IJB will have to consider going forward. The point I want to mention in terms of the detail, it's summarised, the position is summarised in section 13 further on in the report. There's a table there that summarises the position. You can see that in the short term, one or 2 years, we can cover any forecast shortfalls through reserves and other things. But for a strategic plan, we need to be looking strategically, and we still strategically have a gap by the time we get to 24-25. And that's probably not a surprise because demographics tend to overtake us. They're always going to be a factor in our thinking. And that's the gap, as I said, for a strategic financial plan we need to come back to. But there's an element of consolidating what we need to do, keeping an eye on risks and things that we've got to clarify, and then we can kind of focus on dealing with this underlying strategic shortfall. So I will stop there, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Sandy. Do we have questions for Sandy? Peter.
Thank you, Emma Jane. I note in 7.3, I think it is, Sandy, that salaried GPs are more expensive than the earlier model. Why is that?
Oh, I think you're on mute, Sandy.
Sorry about that. Yes, that is the case. We have a number of practices that are run through a salaried service model, including a couple in Angus. It's difficult to pin down exactly why that is. Sometimes it reflects our ability to recruit, and that triggers kind of premium costs. Sometimes it reflects the almost the contractual arrangements that we have for our salaried doctors, and maybe the level of some of the extra costs built in employing people ourselves. So there are a number of factors, but when we've looked at this in a number of circumstances, it generally has proved that the salaried models are more expensive to deliver. Sometimes it can be things that aren't necessarily clinically related. It could be to do with the way we do other things, the way we look after buildings, the way we clean the buildings. It could be a whole range of different things. But a lot of it is associated with our ability, the way we employ general practitioners. But also, of course, it's not just the cost. Some of these are harder, are difficult for us to staff sometimes, and we have seen that being an issue in there as well. I say sometimes when we're struggling to staff things, we maybe have to pay premium costs to bring staff in at times. I can see David has got his hand up, who's Associate Medical Director for NHS Tayside Analysis, has got a hand up as well, so they both know the answer to this as well.
Okay, Alison, do you want to come in on this?
Well, I agree with what Sandy has said. I think I'm a GP partner, so and also work salaried for the Health and Social Care Partnership. The difference if you're salaried is that you get protected time for study leave, you get protected time and a lot more resources. The time is you've got a 40-hour week, and I can assure you when I'm spending 2 days in general practice as a GP partner, they are long days. So I guess that you get the profits from your business, you're invested in it. And I'm not saying that that's a good thing, working all these hours, but that is the nature of it. The challenge we have is that GPs don't necessarily need to want to work in that way anymore, because there's the concerns about work-life balance, and if it was so much greater off that you were being a partner, then everybody would want to do it. But it is proving quite challenging for a variety of reasons, and particularly because you're left in responsibility for your premises, your staff, your workforce at times where recruitment is challenging into general practice. So I guess it's got its pros and cons, but that is probably my thoughts on why it is more expensive to employ salaried, because you don't get the sort of investment in your own business and all the extras that you provide when you're a partner.
Thanks, Alison. And David?
I think very good points from both Sandy and Alison there. Absolutely. Independent contractor GP surgeries know best how to run independent contractor GPs. They know where the efficiencies are. They do extra work that you couldn't ask a salaried GP to do, because it's not part of being a GP seeing patients, it's part of managing your practice. So there are, I think, experts in managing practices, and then there is NHS Tayside trying to run a practice to replicate that, and we are not as good as the experts in managing practices. Says there are certain contractual requirements for salaried GPs. That's a separate issue. It comes in part from a contract that was negotiated between the UK government and the EMA back in 2004, which requires certain session lengths, certain study leave requirements, and so forth. So all of these build in additional cost pressure. And as I think both Sandy and Alison said, there are a reason why our 2C practices, that the ones that are run by NHS Tayside are run by NHS Tayside, and that's because they are the ones which independent practitioners could not run themselves, and somebody had to step in and run them. So we are looking at the most difficult practices, and I think we've done a lot of hard work trying to make them less difficult, and trying to make them places that work more functionally and better. And unfortunately, all of that does come with a degree of cost.
Okay, thanks very much to both David and Alison for a very helpful explanation. Peter, was that okay for you?
Yes, I think so. I was wondering if what has been said would impact in any way on the tendency for GP practices to give up. You know, does it make the salaried model more attractive to them? But I've heard that, you know, the practices that we're sustaining with a salaried model are the more difficult ones. I can understand that.
I've worked with lots of practices that have got sustainability issues, and I can assure you that giving up is the last thing that most of them want to do. It truly is something that comes out of desperation. So I've worked in a number of places where we've managed to forestall that. The hours that people have put in, very much the attraction of being an independent contractor GP is that you are responsible for how it is that you run your surgery, and that locus of control, that ability to shape the way that you work to the needs of your patients and not have to go through an intermediate is one of the key drivers of being a GP. You want to do the best thing that you can do for your community that you're serving in. And it's part of the reason why in one of our Dundee practices, Whitfield, which is a 2C practice, one of our ex-Angus GPs who we managed to secure, Dr. Forrester, is hoping to take that back into GMS just simply because that practice having become successful, Becky having led a team very well to the point that they were starting to find it irritating to be hemmed in by what NHS Tayside was wanting to do. I've actually decided to take that back into GMS. So hopefully we'll be losing a 2C practice for a positive reason rather than anything else. So I think I certainly think it would be a strange GP who would want to come to the health board if they had not exhausted every other option first.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Any other questions for Sandy before we move to the recommendations? No. Okay, so you'll have seen the 5 recommendations. The final one is that a final version of this strategic plan comes back in April for approval. So are we all happy with those recommendations? Yep. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Sandy, for those 3 papers. Okay, so we move on now to item 12, which is the Primary Care Improvement Fund update. Do we have Lisa for this one, Gail?
Yes,
Hi, Lisa.
Hi there.
Do you want to, so we've got the Primary Care Improvement Fund update paper. Do you want to take us through any of the points within to highlight in particular?
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I see as well that my colleague, Dr. Andrew Thompson from the LMC is also on the call, and I'm sure will chip in with any useful information or answers to questions. So this paper is around the Primary Care Improvement Fund, having provided an update to the board back in December on the Primary Care Improvement Plan itself, and we were asked to come back with an update on the financial position. The Improvement Fund, and in particular the reserve that we're currently holding regarding monies that we have not been able to fully utilise during the contract duration, for various reasons, there has been some slippage that's resulted in just short of about 2.7 million being held in reserve. These have built up throughout the entire period of the contract from 2018 to the current position. And the reasons primarily for this are because of workforce challenges. COVID has played a part of it as well, but it's mainly around the difficulty in recruiting to the extended multidisciplinary team across all of the professions in all of the contract areas. And that it's not a unique problem for Tayside or Angus in any way. This is a problem nationally across Scotland, and some more board areas are experiencing more difficulty than others, particularly those out with that central belt area. So it's the difficulties that we have in being able to spend and utilise all the funding that we've been allocated for our PSIP funding. So we've been asked to look at, on a regional basis, and working in collaboration with Perth and Kinross and Dundee Health and Social Care Partnerships, along with the GP Sub and LMC, to come up with some proposals of how we might usefully make use of some of this resource, which is non-recurring funding. And this paper details the proposals that, as a group, that we have developed. Do you want me to go through those individually and give a bit of an explanation about them?
You can say a few words on them if you wish. There's not a huge amount in here, so if you wanted to, that would be great.
Okay, so most of them, obviously, we have to they still have to be in direct support of primary care improvement. It is non-recurring funding, and we also have to they have to be consistent with the ethos and manner of spending for PSIP. So they're mostly good, or you know, things that we can do, and certainly all of them we can do comfortably within the reserve that we have, without it affecting any of our other plans as we continue to progress the PSIP plans itself. So as you will see, a couple of them there are around actual project management support, primarily around PSIP, and to help progress and accelerate the plans. Obviously, the transfer of work from general practice to the NHS and the accelerated plans around that also has an impact on us as a department, and able to grow and achieve and take forward those improvements. So some additional support around that. Premises project management support is something that regionally we feel is very important. Although PSIP itself can't be used on actual premises, the project support would enable us to move forward with the premises agenda. And this is something that's really critical, both for the sustainability and support of our practices, but also for improving the position for general practice, helping with recruitment, etc., as we've already touched on during the meeting. The Recruitment and Retention Fund, this is something that has been funded for a number of years, and so this is an extension for a further 3 years. It's a very positive programme. It's resulted in the development of and attracting GPs into Tayside and retaining young GPs, and so it helps enormously with that sustainability for general practice. Another regional post for general practice nurses to help us take forward the transforming practice nurse role and support practices that way. And then there are a couple of other things around Medlink and practice back scanning, which we've actually been quite successful at delivering in Angus, but this would enable us to reposition those funds, reprovision them, and they're areas that our colleagues in Perth and Kinross and Dundee are yet to take forward. And then lastly, non-medical prescribing is the backfill of GP time, and that's time for GPs to support non-medical prescribers and help provide that support and training and appraisal, etc. So further plans can be developed in terms of full costings for these, but as I say, this is all achievable very comfortably within that reserve funding without having any impact on any of our other plans and proposals as we progress the PSIP plan itself. And that's basically it, apart from the recommendation.
Thanks very much for that. And I think it's really good to have that assurance that these proposals have been developed in collaboration with colleagues in Perth and Kinross and Dundee as well. Do we have any questions? Councillor Bell?
Thank you, and thank you, Lisa, for that update. I'm going to just indicate how old I am by around about the turn of the century. Oh God, I hate that phrase. That our Director of Primary Care was saying there were more GPs over the age of 55 than under 30, which you know, had obviously been a situation that was building up, and I wondered if we had an idea of the proportions on that today. But also specifically, how many GPs have we been able to support to the Career Start initiative? Because I understand one of the challenges is that newly qualified GPs will quite often go abroad to work and don't stay, we don't retain them in the system here, which is really sad. But I guess another key to this is the development of the multidisciplinary approach, and I guess public acceptance of that there are other highly skilled professionals that can be accessible, rather than everyone just going to the GP all the time. So there's maybe a bit of work to do around that. So anything you've got in terms of outreach, I guess, into the public domain on that would be really helpful. Thanks, Lisa.
Okay, so I think I saw David's hand shoot up at the Career Start point there, and David has been much more closely aligned to that particular programme than myself, so I think he can probably give us very exact information, if that's okay.
Absolutely. So I can't give you an exact number, but I can tell you it's more than 20 across Taysides, and they've been in every health and social care partnership area. The scheme started approximately 6 years ago, and around about 7 or 8 at present per year. We attract from all over the country, so it's particularly effective in reaching out beyond Tayside. The Career Start position itself is modelled to try and be attractive to young GPs, and the way that it does that is it has a balance between clinical interest that extends beyond general practice but perhaps complements it, such as working with frailty, medicine for the elderly, in the acute medical unit, working in respiratory. We've had people working in sports physio. There are multiple options for that attachment to a specialist's area of interest. And there's also dedicated time for study with a day a week set aside for that, and a study budget to allow a qualification to be achieved during the 2-year attachment if that's sought. We retain almost all of our career starts within Tayside. Not all of them stay in the practice, but just about all of them stay in the area. And certainly I've been extremely fortunate. In my practice, we've converted one of our career starts who came to us as a full-time GP. So I think it's been very, very useful. In terms of the information with regards to ages of GPs, all 3 health and social care partnerships have undertaken a GP sustainability survey to try and get behind that question. So it's a multiple question survey that goes out to every practice. We've just received the Angus returns, and they're quite in keeping with what we've seen in Perth and Kinross and Dundee. We do have a range of practices. It's not just about how many GPs are over the age of 50, it's how many are over the age of 50 in one particular practice. So if you've got a practice with 5 doctors and they're all 55 years old, then it's very unstable. If you've got 4 youngsters and an old coot like me, then perhaps you're much less worried about that. This is going towards a scoring system, and we're hoping to integrate that across to provide a Tayside perspective. I think parallel to this, we are aware that there are issues with short-term vulnerability in general practice. So we are doing a number of things to try and support practice. The COVID outbreak, for all the ill that it brought, has allowed us to get in with the IT to a much greater degree. So I'm currently self-isolating, being positive for COVID. I'm looking forward to joining in on another laptop to my out-of-hours session this evening. And tomorrow I've got a full day of consulting in my own surgery. You're certainly keeping the laptop industry in full swing. We are also aware that it's not just about the GPs, and I think we've got excellent leadership from Sandra Gowley as one of our lead nurses, who's trying to address those areas where expert medical care is perhaps best sought from an expert nurse. So we are trying to build a workforce that we have rather than wishing for a workforce that could only be. So we have the tools that we have. We can build that which we can from those tools, and we are trying to apply us to those useful things that there are there to build.
Thanks for that, David. Andrew Thompson, will I bring you in at this point as well? You maybe want to pick up on some of those points.
That's great. Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, not to repeat anything colleagues have already said, hopefully, but just to sort of come in both on sort of future sustainability of GPs. I mean, we have gone through a significant period of time where recruitment of GP trainees has been low and optimal. I think at worst we went in Tayside at a point of only having just over a third of the training places filled. But the good news is that certainly the recruitment into the training places this year has been 100%, and the applications for next year is 100%. So actually the future is looking good, and that actually puts into even more context the success of the Career Start scheme. Because if we are training people in Tayside and then offering them that career start opportunity in Tayside, as David's already said, we are then retaining these GPs in Tayside. And I think that is hugely positive. And I think David should certainly be taking a very significant amount of credit for this scheme, which is not just very much valued in Tayside, but is recognised at a Scotland level as well. So I think that's very positive. In terms of, I think Councillor Bell, you mentioned the sort of MDT working and things, and I think that's very interesting, because I think that is really, really important to recognise that. You referred to the turn of the century. I mean, I think that is important, because diseases and things that the patients would routinely have to go into hospital for, to be seen in outpatients and clinics and things, are now being dealt with by GPs in practices. But equally, as we do that, we then need to be able to move things onto our other expert colleagues who are working alongside us, to deal with things that perhaps the GPs used to deal with, that actually they can deal with, and sometimes significantly more effectively. So there really is this just shift of things around the piece. And the messaging to the public is really important. And certainly as part of the new contract, we have released a group of assets through social media, etc., to highlight the roles of each of the different members of the multidisciplinary team, and certainly working with our comms team to continue to increase that messaging as these services are more reliably distributed across the piece. Just a wee comment on the finance. Certainly it is. It seems to be a luxury. It's the first time, certainly in my experience in the health system, where you're sitting with a pot of money that you're struggling to spend, as opposed to having a whole bunch of services that you can't afford. But there are tight restrictions on the Primary Care Improvement Fund, which is why we do have this reserve there. I think we are working on innovative ways to spend it, and certainly with my LMC hat on. So one of the, if you like, one of the gatekeepers to using this funding, we're trying to be as flexible as possible without breaching the word of the contract, to use this in a way that we feel can promote and accelerate delivery of the contract for best effect. But I think it should be noted, and obviously it has been noted to this board previously, that our desire to deliver a platinum standard of service for the contract, because that's what, as clinicians, we want to get behind, still actually puts us as an overspend position at the very end of implementation of this contract, which we will continue to work on Scottish Government to have increases in funding to then meet that by the time we get to that stage. So that's not to put any sort of fear into the IJB that will be overspent. It's just that's what our current forecast is for the future, and that's several years down the line. And I'm confident that there will be additional funding and additional ways to deliver some of the services that we found efficiencies in that will minimise that risk of any sort of mismatch. And if we have to, we might have to just go to a sort of slightly gold-tinted version of platinum rather than full platinum to be able to marry budgets with delivery. So, but I think it's worth again just highlighting and praising the work of all the colleagues that are implementing the contract. It is not down to their lack of willingness to try and recruit to these positions, and it is almost 100% workforce that has driven these underspends. But also, I guess, a request, and part of this is seen in some proposals for the underspend to try and help promote the efficiency of delivering adequate premises, because that will become our rate limiting step, as it has in other IGB areas already, for our ability to deliver the contract if we don't actually have the adequate premises to deliver this in. And it's interesting discussions, things like the Mulberry unit and things like discussion that Alison quite rightly highlighted in terms of sort of other councils. Sorry, I think, Alison, it might have been in a different meeting. Apologies. I've been in that many meetings today that using sort of council premises and other premises, so we take a wider look, because actually using premises that have mixed groups of staff, whether it's health and social care, actually the minute you're actually embedded within the same building with health and social care, then actually health and social care integration automatically happens, because you as the old saying going, you're standing around the same coffee machine. Other hot beverages exist.
That's great. Thanks very much. Thanks, David and Andrew. That's been very helpful for us all. Andrew, Jack, you had a question as well.
Yeah, just a quick and Andrew for that very thorough explanation of and spirited explanation of how the money is going to be spent, and with these innovative ideas. The only question I've got is in the risk section. There's no indication of the size of the risk and any mitigation that's going to be taken. Is there a risk that we won't spend that money, and is there a risk that that money will be then withheld or withdrawn? I think that the plan is excellent. The ideas are great and innovative, but I'd hate to see the risks blowing it out of the water, as it were. So I don't get a feeling for how risky this is from the risk statement. So maybe somebody could enlighten me. Thanks.
See, Sandy's put his hand up. Sandy, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Sorry, Lisa, I'm happy if you want to pick this up, but
I'll leave it to you.
I'll answer as best I can. This is being triggered by the funds available, as Andrew and Lisa have described, have been triggered by underspends in previous years. Andrew's then kind of described, at least probably touched on, but described that there were very clear Scottish Government ring fencing rules around this. And those rules themselves tied back to really, I suppose, the creation of the 2018 GP contract. The government said there will be this much money to support primary care directly. And that's what we're doing. I don't think there's a particularly high likelihood that the Scottish Government will pull the plug on this funding. It is a contractual commitment that they put there. We are a bit behind in terms of where we hope to be, and we might have been a bit further on in other circumstances if we hadn't had things like recruitment issues and COVID to deal with. So I think there's a pretty good likelihood the Scottish Government will leave the money there. If we are able to press on and get all this stuff happening, that likelihood, of course, almost becomes less material because we've got this stuff done. You also asked about the risks of things maybe not happening, and of course there's a risk some of this may struggle to happen, but we are planning to get all these things up and running. Getting approval from the IGB today gives us a big green light to work locally and work with partners to get all this moving on. So the sooner we can, as soon as we have this quickly. So I don't think there's any additional risk that emanates from this report, Andrew. But I think once we've got these things on the go, we'll then look to see, is there a balance there that we can further deploy? And we'll look at that with additional ideas, all in the context of how Lisa and Andrew have described this already.
You happy with that, Andrew?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I was just I didn't want all that good work to go to waste, really.
Okay, I see Alison and Jill want to come in as well, maybe on that point.
Yeah, it's just very briefly to highlight that we are going to revise this overall sustainability of primary care risk. So that's our greatest strategic risk in the Angus Health and Social Care Partnership, is the sustainability of primary care, and that's across Tayside, so it's a Tayside wide risk. So we have a similar approach to how we've Tayside has approached mental health, we're planning a session with stakeholders to get a wide description of the sustainability of primary care risk and components within that. The current risk does include a RAG status of all the projects, so it is being monitored within the contract implementation group for Tayside. So there is a formal monitoring process, and that's included in the current risk that comes to our CCPG risk meetings. But as I say, wider stakeholder engagement, and I'm particularly interested in how we support educational establishments, the training of the workforce, the wider risks, not just the financial risks for us, but that will hopefully be captured. And as it's been a high risk for a long time, I think it's a priority to refresh the risk, but that's not to say there's not an awful lot of work being going on and mitigating actions already in place.
Very helpful. Thanks for that, Alison. So no more hands up, so no further questions. If we just move to the recommendations, you'll see them noted in the paper. Are we all happy with those recommendations? Yep. Okay, and thanks very much, Letha.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item 13 now, which is the performance update. Jill, will I hand over to you for this one?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Chair. So I think that this is our interim performance report, which covers Q1 and Q2 of this current financial year. We've done the dashboard in the same way as previously, because the feedback from IGB is that that's a helpful way to lay it out. So just to pick up on a couple of things in terms of performance. I think just to note as well that obviously the impact of COVID over the last 2 years, but particularly in relation to the performance dashboard for 21-22, and it's quite difficult to absolutely pinpoint exactly how much COVID has impacted on our performance. But I think just to note, this demonstrates probably a time where we're sitting just on target or below target for more of the target kind of national outcome indicators than we have previously. There are some good news stories in here though, in terms of the number of people admitted following a fall. That has improved. We've been doing a lot of work with Scottish Ambulance Service around falls. And one of the themes that you'll hear, and I know George mentioned it before, as did Alison, around our kind of new focus around early intervention and prevention, because the data shows to us that we've got a lot of opportunities there to improve our performance by taking that early intervention and prevention approach. So there, as part of the work going forward to improve our position around the targets, then we will be having that focus on early intervention and prevention. Alison, I don't know if you want to come in around the prescribing before we go on to the supporting care needs at home and telecare.
So we've discussed at previous IJBs around prescribing and the need to focus on a preventative model. You can see here that after earlier improvements, we are increasing our prescribing for chronic diseases, and particularly note the diabetes items is going up, and that reflects good practice in some senses in that people with diabetes are being prescribed appropriate medication, but it also means that we're not getting so much of our prevention of diabetes in the first place. As would be expected with COVID, our prescribing for antidepressants is increasing, and that's a concern. Appropriate treatment, albeit it's really with COVID, we're thinking around some of the social impacts of COVID having led to that. So employment, isolation, and how can we make sure that people's social prescribing needs or other supports within the system rather than resorting to a drug are met. So you can't tell a lot from these quite crude indicators, but it does reflect that our antidepressant prescribing is increasing. So we do have several measures in place looking at this. We've got mental health medication management group now looking at the pathways around prescribing. We've got the GP mental health leads across Tayside, one in each of the health and social care partnerships, working on pathways, and a bit of work done by Andrew Radley starting in one practice in Angus, looking at where people are prescribed an antidepressant, are they being offered appropriate social prescribing opportunities as well. So it's not about saying that medication is wrong or right. It's about giving people the option, shared decision making, and making sure our opportunities for computerised cognitive behavioural therapy, other interventions are available. So yeah, I guess that it's all work in progress as part of the prescribing strategy.
Thanks, Alison. And just to give the board assurance, a lot of this work's picked up through Living Life Well as well, and as part of the work that we're looking to progress within Angus. Just drawing people's attention to the one where we have some discussion on, and we don't seem to be making a lot of progress in terms of the data there. Just a few things to highlight from the introduction of the 8-week free trial period for telecare. The figures that we've got is that there's a 72% retention rate for people that have participated in the trial. And for those who have returned the equipment, the main reason is that they've either moved to permanent care or hospital, and sadly some have passed away. The use of other artificial intelligence, so like Alexa, Google, etc., smart lighting, and the technology, the home technology to support home, we don't routinely collect that information, and that's something that obviously people can go out and do themselves in terms of supporting themselves at home. It's something that we're keen to look at in terms of how we start to build up some of that information. I think COVID has had an impact on that and has prevented higher uptake of telecare within Angus, and part of that has been around the assessment process, just purely as a result of COVID, but I think that's something that we're coming out of now, and I think we can pick that up going forward. In terms of the communication, Facebook portal, Alexa, they've all really supported people, vulnerable people, to feel a bit more or a bit less socially isolated and secure within their own homes, and boosted their confidence. And we have got that feedback, but potentially also supporting their own kind of self-management and health and well-being as well. So telecare, it's an area where we are still very keen as part of our remobilisation and review of how we're going to start to deliver or continue to deliver services post-COVID, very much part of how we want to continue to progress. The other one just to draw some attention to is in relation to the drug and alcohol services treatment within 3 weeks. That is a target where we've previously always performed very well, and it's the first time in a while that we've been under the target for that one, and I think it reflects some of the previous discussion that we've had around the increased demand on services, particularly around mental health and substance use, particularly throughout the COVID pandemic. The numbers in this one are very small, and our performance in comparison or benchmarking with other neighbouring partnerships is actually still very good. And the data for Q3 shows that we have made a slight improvement in that. Part of the challenge has been around the number of people who at a point in time have been referred to the service because there wasn't anything else available to them as a result of the pandemic, but by the time they've come into the service, the assessment is that they no longer need to be seen by the service or any specific treatment interventions. So there's a lot of work going on around drug and alcohol at the moment, and happy to bring an update back. I think I am going to bring an update back in due course around the work that the ADP are doing to support that across Angus, which is quite good because it's a really good piece of work that we're progressing through the MIS standards, etc. So a lot of work that is going on there, and there's very much strong links with the work that we're doing around mental health. Care at home, again, it's something that the IGB have been cited on throughout a number of reports from different aspects. So I'm not going to labour that point anymore, and I'm sure George will come in if there's anything specific, but we have and continue to see an increase in the number of care at home hours provided. Again, in terms of the enhanced primary community care response, again, we have seen an increase in terms of our emergency admissions, readmissions, and again, a lot of them, we have put specific information in around the COVID-19. One of the biggest challenges for us around this and the integrated priorities and care and pathways is around the level of delayed discharges that we're seeing, and that I include that for both physical and mental health. So that includes acute inpatient mental health, as well as our kind of main hospital areas in Angus for Whitehills, Arbroath, and indeed Nine Wells. So we are seeing and continue to see quite a lot of delayed discharges. Again, given what George was saying earlier on around the work that we've done around supporting care at home and the additional recruitment to that, we are hopeful that we will see an improvement going forward. Bed days lost due to complex delays. Again, we've had a few conversations around that and the impact of COVID and on guardianship applications, etc., which has contributed to the performance around that. I don't think there's anything else, Chair, but happy to take some questions if there's any.
Okay, thanks very much, Jill. I just had a couple actually. Just on the targets, who sets the targets?
So in terms of, I know in the recommendations we have agreed to go back and review the targets, because I think there's a lot of, so there's some national indicators that we have, and some of the targets are set locally, some of them are set nationally. So we need to look at and review the targets, in particular around the care at home hours. I know what George is going to come in and say, so I will let him come in and say that, if that's okay, Chair, just specifically around that one, and the operational definition or the thought process that we had when establishing that target previously.
I think it would be useful I certainly would find it useful to know if these were national targets or targets that were set, by the HSCP, if you like.
What we can do going forward, Chair, is just specify the ones that are the national targets and what's our local targets going forward.
That would be helpful. Thanks for that. Councillor Bell?
I don't think my hand was up first. I saw some, but I don't know who else was there. I didn't want to jump the queue.
But it looks like you were up first.
Right, okay. Well, apologies if I have jumped the queue to anyone. Okay, thanks for that, Jill. I was actually going to mention the alcohol and drug partnership, and I guess if you're bringing a report to the next IGB, it may well be able to include any local intelligence on the report that came out in the last day or two about decreased alcohol consumption across the country, but higher in men between, I think, 45 and 65, and the kind of local impact that's had to help us address that. But I wanted to refer to the note at the bottom of page 108 about reductions in respite. There's a sentence in there that says more regular, shorter breaks for carers may reduce the need for residential respite. I think in an ideal world that would be the hope, but I think the reality, I think it's a sketchy planning assumption, because I know from speaking to carers that they're really struggling. They may have been allocated a decent package as a carer, but they're really struggling to get that carer support to free them up for those shorter breaks. And that, I think, will be building up a greater need for residential respite. It's probably too early to say definitively on that, but that's certainly a sense I'm getting from speaking to people. And that links directly back to what Chris was saying in the previous conversation about that, the access, the sustainability of the carers staffing resource across the piece. So I really just wanted to pick that out as an anxiety, as a planning assumption. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Bell.
Okay, and Hayley?
Thanks, Chair. It's kind of information comment rather than a question, but I think it's quite relevant to some of the conversations that have been had in regards to the mental health situation and also care at home. Something that has been identified is that there is a need for an additional sort of service in regards to our telephone befriending service that we provide at the moment. So as a TSI, we will set services up and incubate them and then pass them over to relevant third sector organisations that would be able to take it forward. And one pilot that has been identified as an intergenerational befriending service that can support people in regards to care at home, in care homes, and also within the people that are struggling with their mental health. So that's been identified through our locality workers and social prescribers. We also have a young people's development worker who's been speaking, now managed to get back into schools due to the restrictions sort of easing. And there's a number of school pupils in 5th and 6th year that would be very interested in taking some of this on. So what we're looking at the moment is starting a pilot in the Forfar Kirriemuir area to see how this would go. Once we get it set up, as I say, we won't be keeping the service, we'll put it back over to a relevant third sector organisation. But I just think quite interesting for IGB to be aware that there are additional support that will be put in place in regards to this mental health and also the care at home situation. There is also an opportunity to link that into care homes as well. We have spoke to a few different care homes who have also said that this would be a welcome sort of addition to what they've already got. So watch the space. It's not set up yet, but it is in the pipeline. So I will update further when we have got it set up. But I think it's just really fitting that the IGB should know that this is something that's coming.
Very helpful. Thanks for that, Hayley. That was really interesting. I'm going to bring in George just now. George, I hadn't realised your hand had come up. You probably wanted to come in on some of what Jill was talking about in terms of targets, perhaps. Can I bring you in now?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just 3 things to say. Quick comment about delayed discharge. Using the winter planning monies from the Scottish Government that we referred to earlier, we're establishing a new care manager post in the delayed discharge hub at Ninewells. So I think that'll make a difference to our efforts in the delayed discharge field. I wanted to comment on Julie's remarks about residential respite. I think you're right, Julie. That's quite a complicated field. I think daycare is in that mix as well. So it's a combination of care at home, what's provided in daycare or day centre provision, and residential respite. And I must admit, as our efforts are really about keeping people in the community, as long as they can safely be kept in the community, I expect residential respite to go up a bit in demand as well. But we're not quite excited because there's a bit of a COVID hangover in that regard. Oh, here's a dog coming to bother me. And last of all, that care at home indicator, it stands out like a sore thumb, as I read, actually, and it is a bit of a legacy issue. So I think that is a national indicator that goes back certainly to when I started in the role of the head of adult services in 2013. That was still on the national indicators then, and I don't think that view of increase of care at home provision being a negative indicator is very outdated, and it doesn't fit with our strategic plan, because our drive is to increase care at home provision for people as they need it, and that's our statutory duty to assess for services and provide those services or commission them. So for me, the increase in care at home hours is a positive, not a negative. So I think as Jill said, we need to revisit that as an indicator. It's pretty out of date, I would say. Hope that helps.
Thanks, George. Gail, I see your hand up. Do you want to come in at this point or after we've heard a few more questions?
Yeah, it was actually just, Chair. A number of these indicators do have national indicators alongside them, so you should be able to see that. Your emergency bed days, your readmissions and your emergency admissions and your bed days lost to complex delays, all of these are either MSG or national indicators. What I don't know is there a proposal that nationally they will relook at these indicators? Because I'm agreeing with what you're saying. I think they're fairly old hat now. And somebody, I would hope, at Scottish Government level will be re-looking at them in the lessons learned from COVID and are they the right indicator. In relation to some of the others, in my previous role, I did set some of these targets, but I know that they haven't been revisited for a number of years, so I'm not very precious about it now, and I would be supportive of people re-looking at that. The second bit was in your report under 3.4. I just wanted to reiterate what's been said, but to draw your attention to, Alison did say that the GP lead was actually in post working within the community mental health team, but also there's the rollout of the Links Health Centre model and the work that James Kennedy has recently been awarded, real commendation for regarding mental health and one of the priorities. So I would ask the committee to support that and welcome that piece of work that we're looking at rolling out for mental health. And it's a major coup that we're doing that locally in Angus.
That's very helpful, all of that. Thank you very much, Gail. Peter Burke.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for the report, Jill. Can I come back to personal care at home? You actually talk about the need to focus on early intervention, prevention and moving the life curve. And you also comment on the risk financially and workforce based. And I'm wondering whether that should be an additional item in the previous report that Sandy presented, report 9, 3.15.3, where we talked about basically the risks of workforce and finance there regarding care at home, and whether that should be a separate line on that report.
Sorry, Peter, a separate line on this report.
But I'm talking about effectively an identified risk in the previous report, in report 9, where we talked about the various risks to try to increase the care hours at home.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're trying to do when we look at the risks is make sure they are linking back to our strategic risks as well. So there is a bit of in-house cross-checking that we could do around that, just to make sure that that we are cross-checking between all of the reports and that we are linking back to our strategic risks from a partnership perspective.
Yeah, good.
George, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, it just occurred to me when Peter was asking that question that one caveat on what I said earlier, increasing personal care at home is, generally speaking, a sign of responsiveness to need, but it does contain a slight negative as well. We would hope that as we focus more on preventative and early intervention work, that we might see some inroads into that group that require personal care at home as people's ability to look after themselves gets a bit better, and we will strengthen early intervention and prevention work. And through the strategic planning group, we're really embarking now on some pretty big areas of work on early intervention and prevention. So I would hope, Peter, we can eat into that group a wee bit through that work.
That'd be good.
And Catherine.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to draw our attention to the days lost to complex delays for all ages, and the RAG status is showing as red for that indicator. I just wanted to highlight it specifically because there was a report published, some colleagues may already be cited on this, earlier this week, which was Coming Home Implementation, the report from the Working Group on Complex Care and Delayed Discharge. And that report has a number of kind of significant areas of proposal therein, including national scrutiny arrangements around this particular indicator. So I wondered whether or not it's maybe too early what, if any, additional scrutiny we might want to do locally in relation to that particular theme to prepare ourselves for any future activity we might want to undertake here. Thank you.
Jill, do you want to come back on that point?
Sorry, I'm a couple of seconds behind. Thank you for that, Catherine. And I have to be honest, I haven't seen that report, so I will familiarise myself with it, but would be happy to look at that. And if we need to bring something back to IJB in the future, then we can. I think George has just put his hand up around that as well, Emma Jane. The complex delays for us have been quite a significant challenge over, and there's a lot of work that we can do, but there's some that we are quite restricted on in terms of awaiting the court process before we can do anything with. I don't mean that in a negative way, but in terms of how we support the transition of care for those individuals to the most appropriate place. But happy to look at that report, Catherine. I will seek it out.
George?
Yeah, just to say, Jill, it's coming through a number of different sources, as these things sometimes do. So it's coming. I've seen it through, and we've got somebody looking in that in the LD service, looking at the report, Catherine. So we'll get some more information on how we are compared to the ask of that report in due course.
Okay. Any more questions, comments on this paper? No. So we're happy. There's three recommendations at the start, and are we happy with those recommendations? Yep. Okay, thanks very much. We'll move on to agenda item 14 now, which is the stroke rehabilitation pathway review and update on that. Jill, again, is it?
Chair, thank you very much. So this is just a follow on from our stroke paper that we brought back in August last year, which described the work that we have been doing in partnership with Dundee Health and Social Care Partnership around the stroke rehabilitation pathway review. We had agreed that we would bring an update back to the February IGB. So the report just lays out some of the work that has been ongoing since August last year around the actual pathways themselves, the workforce, the comms and engagement, and the environment and equipment. Morag's on the call, so she may want to come in and speak a bit more in detail. I think just to draw IGB members to some of the feedback that we have received from people who had an inpatient stay within RVH following on from a stroke, and the positivity that we can see from those comments, which is always nice to hear. So I was just wanting to draw board's attention to that. We are looking to continue to make progress. A really good piece of work that's happening collaboratively with third sector colleagues and the voice of patients who have had a stroke in the past to inform and progress the new pathways. Morag, is there anything that you're wanting to add to that?
I think it's just worthy just of note that just on the back of the feedback from the patients as well, but the clinicians, some of the clinicians who are working now within the community who were previously in the stroke unit, and they've got there's been some positive feedback from patients about their ability to be able to draw patients into the community a bit earlier, because we've got that stroke specific care within the community. And also just to note that Matt Lambert, one of the stroke consultants, fed back at the clinical partnership group last week, I think, and that was received quite positively, the update and ongoing support for the work that we're doing. And just as Jill has said, we're continuing to build on it week by week and month by month to develop the service.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I read this as a very positive paper in terms of that collaboration that's happened between Dundee and Angus and with the third sector partners as well. Questions, comments, Councillor Bell?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks for this report. I've had to deal with quite a bit of hostility in the community, in the wider community, maybe not directly in the families or people who use the service, because there seems to be quite a bit of misunderstanding out there, and I think it would be helpful to see some positive comms go out on the back of this, if that's something that our comms team could look at. But also I wanted to pick up on the equality impact assessment. I've got a query on that on page 116. item 6, the Fairer Scotland duties, it says there are no negative citizens under Fairer Scotland duties, and yet further in the full equality impact assessment, it does actually specify that people with low income and financial constraints might be disadvantaged, and likewise the rural dwelling populations. I just wondered, was that maybe just an oversight in the compiling of the document, because it doesn't, they don't match up, and I would have thought that would be definitely a Fairer Scotland implication there.
Thank you, Councillor Bell.
And what are we doing to support people who might be impacted by that financially? Can we offer them some financial support for transport, for example? Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Bell. In terms of the positive comms, I think it's work that I know Sally and her colleagues in Dundee have got an ongoing kind of comms plan around that, and that's part of the gathering the feedback from not just inpatients in RVH, but other people who have gone through a stroke and possibly gone straight home to get their experiences as well. So happy to have that conversation with Sally around getting some additional comms out around that, and a bit of a progress report. I think just to note around that from a staff perspective, they do get briefings to keep them up to date with the progress, but take that comment on board, Councillor Bell, around a bit of a wider comms for that. In terms of the equality impact assessment, I suspect that probably is a bit of an oversight. I don't know if Sally wants to come in around that. I know there's a few people that worked on that, so it probably is a bit of an oversight. Julian will go back and have a look at that. As part of the work ongoing and the pathway, we will take into consideration where people maybe need some additional support, and that was something that was highlighted at the sessions that we had with the public around how can we support people in a different way to make sure that this pathway works for everybody. So that will be taken into consideration, Councillor Bell, going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. And Healy?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just linked to this work as well, there's been an awful lot of ongoing work with Derek Tasker, Morag and others in regards to creating an Angus Neuro Hub. So it's really just for noting that that's something that's on its way to be set up, and that's going to be quite pivotal around our social prescribing service and looking at creating a multidisciplinary team, which potentially might be based in the Cross in first instance, but obviously that's a test of change to see if that's the best place for it, or we need to look at obviously moving it around to make it more accessible to other members of the community. But again, this is quite an exciting project because it's very much a first. Here in the building last week, and he was very, very enthusiastic about what we can do. So I think, yeah, just to kind of watch this space, but again, something that's going to be developing over the coming months. So just I'll update better when we've got more information on that.
That's great. Thanks very much, Healy. And Councillor Speed?
Yeah, thanks. Just to pick up again on the equality impact assessment, and the potential negative impact for people with protected characteristics, and in particular transport barriers. I just wondered if we could just get a little bit more detail on the work that's been done to help address some of those barriers for people.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Speed. Sorry, Chair, everybody's frozen, so I've put my camera off to see if that makes a difference, because I'm still here.
We can hear you. Okay.
So I guess it will Speed, in terms of the feedback to Councillor Bell, we will take that into account when we are looking at the pathway. We're not quite there yet in terms of determining the needs, but that will be taken into account when we're looking at what we're going to be providing. Where Morag or Sally might want to come in and give a bit more detail around some of the discussions that have been going on around the kind of transport and supporting and ensuring people have the appropriate access and support to the pathway. Morag?
Thanks, Jill. Yeah, we are obviously in the quite early stages of developing the community rehab teams. But one of the advantages and some of the feedback that we've had from them is the fact that we've got a stroke-specific community rehab team. So actually, in some cases, we're able to take the rehab to the individuals rather than have them need to come into a central point. So that's one way of beginning to address that as we expand the team, and they will take into consideration when they're assessing the patients in their home environment their ability to travel and access the service in other areas. The feedback from some of the community rehab teams are that they've been able to be responsive to these to the patients and their individual needs and treat them at home. It's definitely something that we are looking to move into the next phase. We have focused very much on the healthcare teams at the minute and trying to get them established, but we know that there's a much wider group that we need to consult with and develop ongoing plans for in terms of how people access the services and how we manage that, and transport will very much be part of that.
Okay, thank you.
Gail?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Morag, for highlighting that. I think for Councillor Bell in particular, because she's raised it, it's really important that she knows that and knows what the plans are with our proposals for stroke rehab teams in the community, because that's absolutely our desire, and that's what our ask has been, to provide that more care at home and more teams in the community. I think it's an excellent paper, it's excellent progress that you're all making, and I think the feedback that's attached is really good. So thank you, Sally, and I'll leave you, Sally, to come in and explain regarding the proposals for feedback. But what jumped out at me in the comms and engagement was these meetings are to be expanded in the next couple of months, and they will include the wider network of people who care for stroke people that have had a stroke and their families, and I think that's a really crucial proposal and development. So again, I hope the IGB members note that point as well. Thank you, Hayley, as well, for highlighting the Neurological Family Hub. I'm absolutely delighted about that, because I'm on the National Neurological Society National Care Network, and I represent all the chief officers on that group. So it's really exciting. We're going to test that in Angus.
Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you. Just for the record, I'm fully supportive of that care at home concept. The issue around misinformation wasn't around my misunderstanding of that. It was what I've been having to deal with in the community. So just to be clear, I've been trying to communicate the correct message. Thanks.
Okay, do we have any other questions or comments on this paper? No, we've got two recommendations to note the progress made with the redesign of the stroke rehab, and then to seek a further update in August this year. So are we happy with those recommendations? Yep, that's great. Thank you very much. And thanks, Jill, and thanks, Morag, as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so we move on to item 15, which is the Learning and Physical Disability Priority Improvements Update. And I'm handing over to George for this one.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, indeed, it's a progress report and an update. We've been bringing reports about the Learning Disability Improvement Plan, I think probably since about 2015, and physical recently about 2019, I think, since that service was established in 2018. We've been trying to bring those together really in a single unified disability service, and hence the move to have that covered in one report. Our last report was August of last year. So the service is very much, or the service works very much on a continuous improvement basis. I'll highlight a few things from the report, in particular really some issues around changing demographics, and that includes the ageing profile of our carers group, increasing complexity of need, a significant focus on autism, including in highly complex and forensic cases, accommodation issues for people with disabilities, and challenges in obtaining high quality care at home for people with disabilities. That's a Tayside and a national issue, and it'll feed into our framework review. There's a providers framework review being undertaken just now, and we're conscious of the need to, I think, drive some improved quality into our commissioned services for people with disabilities. We have good stakeholder engagement with the client group. I think that's really important. A couple of new things. We are launching a pilot for a review officer for complex care cases within the service, and that'll be kicking off in the spring. And we're also undertaking a review of supported accommodation just now. So really the report is just to provide an update, ask members to recognise that. But I'm also recommending that we reduce our reporting frequency. As I say, we've been taking in 6 monthly reports for quite a few years now. I think at times we struggle to find new business to report in that, because the work's becoming much more normal business for us. If the board is amenable to reducing the frequency, I can cover any headlines between the annual reports through the strategic planning progress update, and the way that I do for a lot of other services. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. Do we have comments, questions? Peter.
Yeah, thanks for that, George. Can I come back to 5.2? I'm interested in the size of the problem there for the complex individuals. You say a small number. Is that sort of 2, 10, 20? I'm trying to get a grasp of the accommodation requirements and the team requirements.
Sorry, Peter, I'm on mute. I don't know off the top of my head, but I've got Linda Kennedy on the call, and she might want to be able to contribute to that, if that's okay, Chair. Linda's the service leader for the services.
Hello, thanks, Peter. Yes, there is a very small number, below 10, of people who have very significant complex learning disability and complex autism, and these are people who require, very bespoke environmental adaptations, as well as fairly skilled staff and rigorous positive behaviour support plans. So it's a very small number. It may be something that requires some collaboration with our neighbouring authorities who are faced with similar issues, but it is a small number.
Thanks, Linda. Are you hoping to accommodate these people as a group, or are you taking them one by one and looking at each of their individual needs?
So in order to achieve a sustainable support for people, where you're looking to encourage a specialist provider perhaps to the area, it can obviously be helpful towards that. However, as already mentioned, we have the Coming Home report, which really does focus our attention on bringing people back to their own communities and their own families. We can't guarantee, obviously, that we can provide that level of support in every town in Angus, but we would at least try to do that in Angus.
Okay, thanks, Linda. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, and Councillor Speed.
Yeah, thank you. Just to declare that I do have family members that would fit into these cohorts. I missed the kind of opening part of the meeting because of IT issues. But yeah, I would still want to take part, and it's really just to more make comment, and that I welcome the report coming kind of combined in terms of the learning disability and the disability teams, and our previous reports have had those plans, improvement plans, kind of separate. I think it's quite nice seeing it combined together. I think some of the feedback that I get from individuals and families is that they might have a combination of needs. So they might have learning disability, there might be physical, there might also be autism, and sometimes they feel that when they're kind of put into a particular team, it doesn't recognise then those other diagnoses that they have, and that it can sometimes prevent access to services that are specific to the team that they're in. So I really just wanted to raise that as a bit of a concern, and I guess seek some assurances that that's continuing to be monitored and looked at.
George, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I would hope that wouldn't be the case, Lois, but without concrete examples, which we can't obviously discuss here, I'm happy to have them offline. It'd be difficult to know how to respond, but we would always take a holistic and collective view of people's needs. So.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bell?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was just thinking in terms of, reducing the frequency of the reports. I think we need to see the implications from the coming home report, and what actions might emanate from that for us, unless you were wanting to keep that as a separate reporting stream, George. And I guess I'm a bit anxious as well about us going back to larger institutional living. If we're looking at a specialist provider, that's just a wee caveat from me.
Yeah, I wonder if a briefing note would suffice on the implications of coming home, the update report. I think that wouldn't be difficult for us to do. Regarding the second issue, Julie, I think there's a balance to be struck. I wouldn't see small collective living arrangements of 2 or 3 people as being the same as large scale residential complexes. I think, there's a balance to be struck between the benefits of communal living, reducing the risk of isolation, etc. So I just think that's to be a balance. So certainly people are very alert to that.
Okay. So would other IGB members accept a briefing note as suggested by George would be sufficient? Yep. Okay. Do we have any other questions or comments on this report? No. So to recommendation, the content and regarding the frequency of reporting, and I think that the key point in that is that emerging issues can be highlighted in the general strategic planning update reports, which come to every other IJB meeting. So are we all happy with those? Yep. Thank you very much, everybody. So we'll move to item 16, which is the date of the next meeting, and that is Wednesday, the 20th of April, 2022 at 2 p.m. Now, colleagues, I'm going to suggest we have a short break. We've been sitting here for well over 2 hours now. I think everybody could do with getting up and stretching their legs. So can I suggest we come back in 10 minutes time, if that's okay, just to continue with the reserved items of business that we have on our agenda.
Chair, sorry to interrupt, it's Karen, that we consider item 17. It's just that we're actually still live streaming the meeting.
Okay, yep.
And I think maybe possibly David Thompson had his hand up. Maybe he's put it down again.
Didn't see that. Okay.
Sorry, Chair, it was just the same point as Karen made.
Okay, so item 17, sorry, I lost my agenda there. I've found it now. So 17 is the exclusion of public and press. So the IJB, you're asked to consider in terms of paragraph 2, 3, 6 and 9 of Bill 7A to the Local Government Scotland Act 1973, whether the public and press should be excluded during creation of the following items only, as to avoid the disclosure of exempt information. Are the IJB happy with that exemption?
Agreed.
Yep. As I said, we'll have a 10-minute break now and reconvene for those final 2 agenda items.